Hello. Today I'm going to talk to you about one of my absolute favourite interfacings from Vlieseline. I'm going to talk to you about Decovil, which is a wonderful leather-like product that's got glue on one side, which means you can iron things onto it like fabric transfer foil, which we'll be using today. It was created to be used for bags. You can iron the fabric on, cut your handles from it, all that kind of thing. But of course, I love to try and do different things with it. You can just see shining in the lights the glue on one side of the Decovil. This is the heavier weight one. You can see by the way that it's creasing up, it's quite firm. The great thing is about Decovil, one of the many great things is it doesn't fray when you cut it. So it's particularly good for book covers, boxes, as well as bags and that kind of thing. And because it's got glue on, you can decorate it. The lighter weight one is Decovil 1 Light. And you can see from this, the way that it's folding, it's much lighter. It's about half the weight, I think, of the Decovil 1. And from this wondrous product, we're going to make a kind of Mexican heart design brooch. This is obviously larger than most of you would wear. You can always scale yours down. But I must admit, I did have fun sewing all the sequins on. So this is basically Decovil 1, Decovil Light, and a little bit of Bond Weber applique in the middle. And then there's a little brooch pin on the back. So this is what we're going to do. This is a 7-inch square of the Decovil 1, the heavier weight, which is the piece that we're going to be making the brooch front from. And because we're not going to be using an embroidery ring when I stitch on the sewing machine, I'm going to just use this as a kind of support for me to hold my fingers on. The brooch will be smaller. So we're going to paint the Decovil on the glue side with acrylic paint watered down by about half. You don't want thick paint on here because it will clog the glue up and it won't stick. So I'm just going to paint the shiny side, and then you need to wait for that to dry, which could take overnight depending on how wet you've made it. But this needs to be bone dry before you use it. My 7-inch square of Decovil 1 is dry now. I've painted it yellow because I'm going to be transfer foiling it with gold, and it's just nice to have a background to show through the transfer foil. I've also got a heart shape which will go in the middle of the gold brooch, and then I've got a little piece of green satin that I've ironed Bond Web onto the back of, so then I'll be able to stick that on to there. So we'll have our stacked heart. The 7-inch square of Decovil 1 is now painted and dried. Okay, and I'm just going to foil it with transfer foil. So you're working with the shiny side or glue side up, and transfer foil comes off from underneath the top carrier sheet. So it's kind of backwards. It kind of turns your brain inside out a bit. And you need to have your iron on wool, sort of a medium heat. You certainly don't want it on full heat because it will make the carrier sheet crinkle up because it's only plastic, and then you get a very creased surface, and we need a reasonably smooth foiled surface. So just for way of speed, I've actually got a folded up towel on my table because it's just quick and easy, and I'm using baking parchment underneath and on top of the work before I iron it. Normally I would use Thermolan, but that's in the other room, and I'm just using a towel because it's on the floor by my table. So I'll just move my little brooch out of the way for the minute. So baking parchment on the top, non-stick baking parchment, not greaseproof paper. And then the iron is on wool or medium, and you don't have to press hard. It's the heat that does the work. You just need to make sure that you iron the complete surface of the foil, always remembering that the iron is narrow here and it's not hot there. And also that it ends there, not there. So don't forget to do the corners. Just take your time and don't rush it. The key is to have the iron on medium or wool. Okay, then we wait for it to cool down. So while that's cooling down, I'm just going to foil the little red heart. Now, obviously, you can use any colour you like. It's totally up to you. And again, not pressing too hard. It's not the pressure that works, it's the heat. The yellow piece should be cool enough to peel off now. Well, that's where it's stuck. And then you can see that the foil is probably going to flash in the lights. And stuck very well. It's come from underneath the carrier sheet. Now, because there's a web of glue on the Decovil, you're never going to get a solid foiled surface. You will get kind of little spaces in between, but it's still beautifully shiny and I love it. And the same with the little heart. The foil's cooled down now, so I can just peel off the transfer foil. Now, it might seem odd to use the same coloured transfer foil as the paint that you've painted the Decovil with, but it just because Decovil is beige, it's just nice to have another colour shining through. You could put blue on top of the red or green or whatever you fancied, just to have an experiment. And now I am going to iron some Bondaweb onto the back of the red heart. I've cut a piece of Bondaweb the same shape of the heart, and I'm just going to iron that on now with a warmer iron, probably near cotton. You'll notice that I transfer foiled the glue side first so that that isn't sticky when I iron the Bondaweb on the other side. So this side is no longer sticky, which means I can now iron the Bondaweb onto the back. So we've got the little heart with the Bondaweb and the backing paper on the back. And I've also got a little piece of green satin in the smaller heart shape, also with Bondaweb on the back, with the backing paper still on. Okay, and they will eventually end up like this. But first of all, I need to make sure that I've got my design on my big piece of Decovil so that we can start to stitch. So I made a template for each of these 3 designs. It's very handy because I've actually cut it out with a soldering iron with acetate sheet, which is see-through, but you can kind of see it against the paper. So I'm just going to draw around this. This is my heart shape that I'm going to add everything else to. So I'm just going to draw around this with a biro, because I'm going to cut it out eventually anyway. Once I've stitched it, this will be cut out. There we go. So I've got my heart shape, the basic shape. And the reason why this is so big, just to remind you, is that I'm going to be doing some free machine embroidery. And I don't need to put this in a ring, but I do need somewhere to put my fingers. So rather than working with it pre-cut, I'm going to cut it out after I've stitched it. So I've got a nice frame to work with. So now I know where my outside shape is, I can now start to iron down these shapes as well. And I'm going to pop some baking parchment on the top, and I'm just going to iron that in place. And then I'm going to take the backing paper off the little piece of satin that I've got. So you can see how we're building up this stacked effect. So just iron this in place. Now I've just noticed that side's wider than that side. But that's something for you to notice and you to be careful of. I've already done it now, so there's nothing I can do. So just be careful when you place this that it is central. So I've got an old Bernina 707 and I've dropped the feed dog here, so there's nothing there to make the fabric move. And I've got a basic darning foot, just a little round one. That's all you need to do free machine embroidery. So you can see I've got red thread and I've brought the bobbin up. So the next thing to do is to bring up the bobbin thread through the Decovil. So you hang on to your top thread, you move the needle into the work, lift it right up to the top, and then you pull the bobbin thread, move that, Kim, so you can see it, up through the work. and then you hang on to both those threads. Put your machine foot down. Always start your stitching with your needle in the work, so you know you've got enough thread in the machine to make it go. So I'm just going to ease off now, and I'm just going to do some little circular motion stitches. So I now have green thread in my bobbin and on the top, and I'm just going to bring the bobbin thread up through the work again. It just stops everything from getting all crumbled up underneath. There we go. So foot down. And now, because I've done circles around the red, I think I might kind of do straight lines. I'll see what I fancy doing. Okay, that's more or less done. It's kind of an interesting stitch. So I wanted to do straight lines to contrast with the little circles that I've done. And you can see why we've used a larger piece of Decovil rather than just working with this little tiny shape, which is just a little bit close to your fingers if you're stitching. So it just means that you don't need to use an embroidery ring if you use Decovil 1 as a base. So I'm just going to release this and cut out the shape. So you've got your brooch front now. At this stage, it's flat. It hasn't got a brooch back on the back, so you could put this onto a book cover, onto a bag, onto a jacket, whatever. It's just a really lovely sort of leather-like firm patch. And this is when you would add your beads and or sequins, or both. I've used sequins on mine. And then to make it into a brooch, you just need another piece of foiled Decovil, this time Decovil Light, because you don't need the extra thickness because you're not going to stitch this. You're literally just going to iron this onto the front part of your brooch. I've already got some Bondaweb on the back of this, and I've taken the backing paper off, and now I'm going to iron this onto the brooch front. So here's the brooch back. I've already got a brooch pin on there. So just turn your work over, iron around the brooch pin. So you'll probably need to do 4 ironings if you like. So that's the bottom of the heart. You need to do it long enough with a hot iron for the Bondaweb to melt and stick the 2 pieces together. Then I'm going to iron above the brooch pin. And again, you don't need pressure, it's the heat that does the work. Then I'm going to iron to the side of the brooch pin and then the other side of the brooch pin. And then leave it to cool down for a minute before you move it. So here you have the 2 little brooches side by side. Here is the one with the free machine embroidery and no sequins, which looks perfectly lovely. But I think I do prefer it with sequins.